Welcome to this daily PBJ devotional. Read 2 Samuel 1 and Ezekiel 10 today. This devotional is about 2 Samuel 1. After the death of Saul, David returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man with torn clothes and dust on his head arrived from Saul's camp. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him homage. "Where have you come from?" David asked. "I have escaped from the Israelite camp," he replied. "What was the outcome?" David asked. "Please tell me." "The troops fled from the battle," he replied. "Many of them fell and died. And Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." Then David asked the young man who had brought him the report, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," he replied, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear, with the chariots and the cavalry closing in on him. When he turned around and saw me, he called out, and I answered, 'Here I am.' 'Who are you?' he asked. So I told him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he begged me, 'Stand over me and kill me, for agony has seized me, but my life still lingers.' So I stood over him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord." Then David took hold of his own clothes and tore them, and all the men who were with him did the same. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, for the people of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And David inquired of the young man who had brought him the report, "Where are you from?" "I am the son of a foreigner," he answered. "I am an Amalekite." So David asked him, "Why were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David summoned one of the young men and said, "Go, execute him." So the young man struck him down, and he died. For David had said to the Amalekite, "Your blood be on your own head, because your own mouth has testified against you, saying, 'I killed the Lord's anointed.'" Then David took up this lament for Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the sons of Judah be taught the song of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen! Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, and the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. O mountains of Gilboa, may you have no dew or rain, no fields yielding offerings of grain. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, no longer anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not retreat, and the sword of Saul did not return empty." Saul and Jonathan, beloved and delightful in life, were not divided in death. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and luxury, who decked your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in the thick of battle! Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were delightful to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war have perished. This is God's word. 1 Samuel ended with Saul committing suicide, according to 1 Samuel 31, verse 4d. And he did so in order to escape torture at the hands of the Philistines, as we saw in 1 Samuel 31, 4c. And he did so also after he was mortally wounded, as we saw in verse 3c of 1 Samuel 31. 2 Samuel now began with David learning of Saul and Jonathan's deaths. We saw that in verses 1 through 4. The man who reported their deaths claimed to have killed Saul at Saul's command, as we saw in verses 6 through 9 today. And that differs from the account given in 1 Samuel 31. What do we make of this difference? The man's account might be true. If so, then Saul did fall on his own sword in 1 Samuel 31, but this Amalekite finished him off. This chapter then adds additional information to 1 Samuel 31. Or, the man's account may be false. In that case then, 1 Samuel 31 described how Saul actually died. He died of suicide. In this chapter, the Amalekite then found Saul dead, but took credit for killing him in a way that sounds compassionate. His reasoning may have been that it was merciful to end Saul's life and his suffering quickly, and that David would approve of his actions as if he did the right thing, sparing Saul some suffering. In other words, the Amalekite may have lied and brought Saul's crown and armband to David to ingratiate himself with the new king. I tend to think that this second explanation is the correct one. But either could be correct, and we just don't know. Regardless of what the actual truth is, David judged the man based on his own words, as we saw in verse 16 today. Instead of being grateful to the man, David was incensed that he would take the life of the man God had chosen to be the anointed king, as we saw in verse 14. What this passage reveals, then, is one of the character qualities that made David a man after God's own heart. In this case, then, it was David's submission to and respect for God-ordained authority. We see David's submission to Saul in two ways here in 2 Samuel 1. First, David referred to Saul as the Lord's anointed twice, in verse 16 once and in verse 14 once. And he punished the Amalekite for killing Saul because he regarded the life of the Lord's anointed to be sacred. By calling Saul the Lord's anointed, David was bowing to the will of God and the authority God invested in King Saul. Saul mistreated David wickedly, but David remained loyal to the king to the very end of the king's life. Second, David eulogized Saul, even saying that Saul and Jonathan were loved and admired. We saw that in verse 23. That goes against human nature. We tend to kick dirt on people who have sinned against us. It is even more delightful to our sinful nature when a leader we dislike falls. But David was genuinely sorrowful at the death of Saul because David loved and trusted in God. David did some wicked things in his life too, but the absolute submission he showed to God's will demonstrates that he was a man who walked with God. If you were tested in this way, could you submit to God's will? If you were asked to be a pallbearer at your boss's funeral, would you be able and willing to do it? Could you stand by, availably, waiting for a long time before getting what you want, like David did? Think about these things and the remarkable strength of character they require. Then ask God to strengthen your character, to help you to love your enemies, to help you to submit to his will and wait for his timing. And I'll see you next time. May God bless you. Hope you have a great day today.